career in housing equity as an assertive community outreach specialist in Washington, D.C., where his knowledge of trauma-informed care was born. He has since managed 4 permanent supportive housing programs and gone on to become a certified trauma-informed care instructor. He is currently serving as the COC coordinator for Southside. Welcome, Liam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
All right. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today for our learning collaborative. And we are going to go ahead and get started. Just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded and that we want to ask everyone to remain on mute until the end of the presentation when we'll be able to do some Q&A. We do have staff that are reading the comments in the chat. And so if you do have any issues with sound or the slides not going through, please just drop that in the chat for us and someone will get back to you. All right, let's rock. All right, so Liam, I'll let you introduce us with the flow of the presentation.
All right, welcome everybody. As Rashonda said, this is trauma-informed care. We're going to start it off by establishing a purpose. Why are we here? What are we doing? We're going to review some shared definitions of trauma, just so everybody has a general basis of what we're talking about. And then we're going to explore some intersections of trauma. So we're going to talk about homelessness and trauma, poverty and trauma, and then different biases in trauma. And then at the end, we'll have a reflection section and a Q&A. So we have a lot for you guys, and we are excited to share this information with you today. So the purpose of today's training: upon completing this training, you'll be able to approach people with a more person-centered lens and better identify and understand trauma factors. Click, please. Thank you. You'll be able to understand compounding factors and the impact on the persons who are affected by the trauma. And then you'll also be able to better facilitate awareness and empowerment in your day-to-day services and the interactions you're having with folks.
All right, thanks, Liam. So throughout this presentation, we will explore some heavy topics. It's important to stay open to the information, even if your views are different. And so we want to start with some ground rules. Number 1, this is a no shame zone. This is all about awareness and being more mindful. And so instead, we hope that you walk away feeling more enlightened and like you have a new level of mindfulness that improves all of our interactions throughout the agencies from top to bottom and deepen our understanding of the clients we serve. So this presentation is for everyone that serves clients, and how we connect with them. We want to be able to do that more intentionally and more mindful. And so we're going to first get started with a visualization exercise. And so the purpose of this clip is to help set the tone for this presentation. Please participate fully and learn something new today and enjoy.
Close your eyes. Picture a convict. What's he wearing? Nothing special. Baseball cap on backward, baggy pants. He says something ordinary like, "Yo, that's shizzle." Okay. Now slowly open your eyes again. Who are you picturing? A black man? Wrong. That was a white woman. Surprised? Well, shame on you.
And so again, we're going to have some fun today. This is a no shame zone. Again, we just want everyone to walk away having another level of awareness and another level of being more mindful of how so that we may have a new level of how we interact and deepen our interactions and our understanding of the clients that we serve.
All right, so before we get started with the definitions of trauma, some of the themes that you're going to see throughout today's training are learning and growth. And within the no judgment zone, this is also a learning zone, and this is also a growth zone. So at any point, please feel welcome to ask your questions in the chat box. Please engage with us in the Q&A, because we really want to make sure that everyone is getting the most out of this experience, and all questions and perspectives are welcome. So with that being said, so trauma, we can often think of it as something that soldiers experience, or we associate it very explicitly with PTSD. The trauma is really just an emotional response to a terrible or horrific event. That could be an accident or an assault or a natural disaster. It's also an exposure to an extraordinary experience that presents a threat to oneself or others and generates a reaction of helplessness and fear. So that's what we really want to focus on there. Trauma is an experience that generates a reaction of helplessness and fear. Next slide, please. Everyone experiences trauma, really, everyone. We can often think of it again in very close association with soldiers or individuals with intense professions like that. But everyone experiences trauma at some level, and it impacts their daily lives differently. Next slide, please. So there are different kinds of trauma. One kind of trauma is an internal trauma. This is a personal hardship. This can be physical abuse or a loss of a loved one or job. These kind of things generate a sense of fear and depression. They can cause grief. They can cause a loss of support, which then further alienates the individual and leads to further depression. There's also external trauma. Click, please. This is an environmental hardship. So this would be something like a natural disaster or a terrorist attack. This definitely leads to a loss of stability, which leads to a lack of resources, a loss of safety, and can potentially cause increased anxiety. Next slide, please.
All right. And so often when we talk about homelessness, our brains are conditioned to think of personal choices that this client sitting before me through a series of unfortunate events and choices have led them here. But before we jump to judgment, even before we start asking their name, collecting pages of personal information, let's start with empathy. All right, let's see what's going on with the audio. This should work.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had a, yeah. And we do it all the time because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Empathy. And so in our day-to-day work, it's important to remember that it's a privilege. We get the privilege to walk along someone during their darkest hour. We get the privilege of serving our most vulnerable. And so what we're asking with trauma-informed care is that you make the choice to be that person that you'd want to experience in your darkest hour. Choose to create the experience that you'd want your family member or a friend to have if they were in this situation. And there's a quote on the screen that says, you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. You can't save the people if you don't serve the people. So again, serving with trauma-informed care training starts with empathy. All right, so we are moving into homelessness and trauma.
So homelessness and trauma, understanding how homelessness creates trauma. So when an individual experiences homelessness, they lack stability in their day-to-day lives. So everything that was normal to them, everything that made them feel secure is not there. The lack of stability creates an inability to maintain basic care habits. This can be eating, bathing, maintaining a schedule, and seeking healthcare or services like ours. The prolonged inability to care for oneself leads to health decreases, financial instability, and anxiety around performing these day-to-day activities. So persons who have experienced homelessness and instability develop a low self-worth, which could impact their engagement with services and their overall well-being. Click, please. So the actual event of becoming homeless can lead to trauma in and of itself through the loss of stable shelter, familial connections, and accustomed social roles and routines. We really don't realize how much we rely on, our social interaction. I think if COVID-19 showed us anything, it's how alienating it can be to be cut off from the resources around you. Individuals experiencing homelessness are in this state of mind constantly. The ongoing condition of homelessness in and of itself, such as the uncertainty of where to sleep or even where to find food, can erode a person's coping mechanisms. So all of these little things that we put in place to keep ourselves safe when stuff hits the fan in our lives often aren't there for individuals experiencing homelessness. So they don't have the same ability to create the same coping mechanisms that you and I may take for granted. So if we look at homelessness across the United States, it's absolutely an epidemic. And Rashonda shared something with me the other day. It's an epidemic that we accept. But all of us here, we understand that individuals in experiencing this trauma may be seeking resources that we can connect them to, but also they're seeking for us to understand and to look at them as a whole human being who needs the assistance. Next slide, please. This takes us into poverty and trauma.
So for many of us from a very young age, we can identify poverty. Even before the word is introduced to our vocabulary, we know it because we have either lived it, We've driven past it or made to believe it is a condition of choice. Rarely do we learn that many of our impoverished communities, those considered ghettos or projects, were intentionally created, funded, and abandoned by our federal government. And so the purpose of this next clip is to introduce a lens to understanding generational poverty, understanding the external systemic policies that created these impoverished communities, those that were redlined, for example, stripped of their resources and funding and left with no opportunities to thrive, but merely survive.
These developments are run by the St. Louis Housing Authority. This is a far cry from the crowded, collapsing tenements that many of these people have known. Here in bright new buildings with spacious grounds, they can live.
It was a very beautiful place, like a big hotel resort, I'd say.
It was like an oasis in the desert. All this newness. I never thought I would live in that kind of a surrounding.
What happened?
Well, one day we woke up and it was all gone.
We pulled up with the moving van. I knew at that point that it was hell on earth.
Pruitt-Igoe looks like a battleground. Vandalism and neglect have left fear among the remaining occupants.
In the middle 50s, St. Louis thought it had solved its low-cost housing needs, but instead a monster was created.
The experiment had gone terribly awry. It was just uncontrollable.
Pruitt-Igoe is such a symbol that we tend to forget that it is no different than the city that surrounded it. What happened to St. Louis was tragic, but that's simply not how we've told the story.
Pruitt-Igoe was always fighting against this terrible riptide of destruction in the midst of an economy that was dying.
The strong, tightly knit communities and families in which I grew up had begun to shatter, and it wasn't there. And it was one of the most tragic things I've seen.
It seemed to me that we were being penalized for being poor. That caused so much anger.
Persons that don't have a decent place to stay are willing to take these kinds of chances. Where we live, we're taking chances.
This is it. This is out of control, and we are no longer going to put up with it. We're not going to tolerate this anymore.
I'm saying, as tenants, we've got to draw a line and say no more. No more.
And along with the quote for that video, only if we can develop a broadly shared understanding of our common history will it be practical to consider steps we could take to fulfill our obligations.
All right, thank you, Rashonda. So like Rashonda said, poverty is not only structural and was created and upheld by the current systems that are in place, but it's also cyclic and can create individual, but also generational trauma. So it's cyclic in the way that, click please. It starts with a lack of resources. So individuals in impoverished community don't have the same opportunities for education and just general opportunity, which then leads to a furthered inability to get gainful income, which leads to higher incarceration rates because these areas and individuals are over-policed and overpopulated, and oftentimes they are, charged with petty crimes or trying to do something to maintain their, needs, and get food in other ways, which then leads to further family instability. So this kind of model, when you break it down, impacts not only the individual, but it impacts their family, and it impacts the family, so on and so forth, because all of these things just are cyclic and continue to affect the next person and then the next person. Next, please. So in addition to the psychological damage that poverty creates, it also creates physical damage. So individuals living in poverty have more back and muscle tension. They have more ulcers and digestive issues. They have more heart arrhythmias and high blood pressure, more depression. We see a higher level of migraine, severe anxiety, and insomnia. But the twist of this is individuals living in poverty are also at a disadvantage when seeking health care. So these conditions become chronic and affect them not only mentally and emotionally, but physically for, you know, a large duration of their lives. Next, please.
Thanks, Liam. And so our last topic today is about bias in trauma. And as humans, we are naturally biased. For example, when I say peanut butter, most people think jelly. When I say Batman, most will say Robin. Salt, you think pepper. This simply means that we have a preference or an aversion towards a particular thing, place, and people. In itself, bias isn't good or bad. Remember, this is a no shame zone. It's our implicit bias. So our attitude towards certain people or associating certain stereotypes to a group of people without our conscious knowledge. That is what creates the problem.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgment you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We'd never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an over-representation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit.
All right. The first bias I want to talk to you guys about today is racial bias. I do want to do a disclaimer that when people or our clients or the folks that we're working with come to us and say that they've experienced racism, this may be an opportunity for us to check those biases within ourselves. And we'll get into it a little bit more later. But also, especially as white folks, we need to recognize that there is an inherent level or there may be a perceived level of power and a different dynamic there. And so it is up to us to recognize our privilege in a space and make it more comfortable and be cognizant of the institutional, structural, interpersonal, and internalized racism that some of the folks we're working with may feel. So with that being said, there are different levels to racism. The first is institutional. So this is policies, practices, or anything that comes from a federal level that reinforces racial standards within a workplace or organization. The second is structural. These institutions collectively uphold these racial policies that are coming down the pipeline and incorporate those practices into their society. So that leads to interpersonal. So that is one or more individuals is carrying microaggressions from one person to another. And then that leads to internalized. So the subtle and overt messages that reinforce negative beliefs and self-hatred in individuals. So that's where our implicit bias comes into play. It is based on, maybe a negative stereotype that we've heard or that's been perpetuated in our lives that we don't realize that we carry with us, that makes us associate this individual as more threatening, or they're in poverty because of their own choosing. So it's important for us to ask ourselves, in what ways do we or our work benefit from racist systems? Myself as a white man, I have a lot of privilege in the world. I benefit from, I can move throughout the world relatively comfortably without having to be challenged or, fear for my life in certain situations. And that's not a privilege that everyone in the world, and especially in America, has. So what are the ways that I contribute? What are the ways that we contribute to these racist systems that are being upheld by these institutional policies and practices? Next slide, please. So how does the daily exposure or the exposure to racism create trauma? Well, racial trauma is the ongoing result of racism, racist bias, and exposure to racist abuse. This chronic exposure to discrimination is humiliating, frightening, and isolating. Racial trauma can affect virtually every aspect of a person's well-being. So that looks like this person, let's say a young Black man is walking down the street. You'll see it in the video a little bit later, but there are certain things that may be going through his mind that me as a young white man wouldn't have to consider walking down, let's say a crowded sidewalk. That's stressful. That's anxiety inducing. His experience going out into the world is already a lot more stressful than my experience going out into the world. And so us as service providers, it's important that we are aware of that and that we are able to validate someone's experience as racism and understand that that's a weight that they carry. Next slide, please. So with that being said, I want to talk to you guys about the different zones. So the first zone of becoming anti-racist, or recognizing that racism is an issue within the structures that uphold and is an implicit bias that many of us have. The first zone is the fear zone. So this is where, you don't believe that it exists. If it does exist, it doesn't exist here. You're very shut off and you're uncomfortable having conversations. The next zone is the learning zone. And it's, okay, I see that this is an issue, but I'm not very educated and I'm not very comfortable in my knowledge of it. And then the third zone is the growth zone. And you're like, okay, this is an issue. I have done the work to become more educated in this, and I'm going to continue taking action against this. So let's imagine for a second that a client tells you that someone you work with at a partner agency was racist towards them. The fear approach says, no, I know them. They didn't mean it that way. They're not racist. That's a fear approach. That's completely negating the person's experience when they came to you and they were vulnerable with you about an experience they'd had. The learning approach says, I'm sorry, are you comfortable telling me more about how that impacted you? So you can validate that as racism, and you can say, oh, okay, that maybe happened. But also, that's asking the person to maybe be more open with you than they wanted to be. So what we want to do is we want to get to the growth approach, which says, I'm sorry that you experienced that. How can I support you? So you're not putting the weight of educating you about racism on the person who is telling you that they have experienced racism. You are doing the work to recognize it within the services and within the community yourself. You are cognizant of the issues that are present, and you are aware of, even though you may not have personally experienced it, you can take the weight off that person and say, okay, all right, I'm very sorry that that happened to you. What do you need? You put them first, and that's what person-centered trauma-informed care is really about. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we move to the next section, let's get into a brief history of police enforcement. So the police in the United States were founded as patrols for catching enslaved individuals. Most southern states had roots in slave patrols, and that's how modern police came to be. Members of the slave patrols could forcefully enter anyone's home if they believed that they were sheltering enslaved or formerly enslaved individuals. So this turns into centralized police departments in the early 19th century. They were overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male, and were focused on responding to disorder and crime. The officers expected to control a dangerous underclass that included African Americans, immigrants, and the poor. And throughout the early 20th century, there were few standards for hiring or training officers. With that being said, remember how I spoke earlier about how as a white man, it is important for me to recognize my privilege. Part of that privilege is understanding that my relationship, my interactions with law enforcement could be very different from the client who is sitting with me, or who somebody in my life who is a person of color who is having an experience with law enforcement. Nationally, the Black individuals who are Black are 5 times more likely than individuals who are white to have the police called on them and to experience a negative or aggressive interaction with law enforcement. 5 times more likely. So understand that calling the police on clients can break trust and may put them in harmful situations. You know, if you show up to a client's home and you believe that you are in a dangerous situation, or they're in a dangerous situation, can you problem solve? Are there other alternatives? Is the client having a mental health crisis? Is the client, you know, just having a bad day and needs a second to breathe? What's going on? Because when you call the police on the client, even if the intentions are good, it's important to understand that different individuals may have had different exposure to police, and calling the police can be very triggering and harmful for them in certain situations. Next, please. The next community I would like to talk to you about is the bias against the LGBTQIA community. So these are people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, intersex, or asexual. And they're more likely than heterosexuals or individuals who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, and also like someone of the opposite sex. To experience traumatic events and adverse childhood experiences. LGBTQIA people of color tend to disproportionately bear the burden of trauma and trauma exposure. And within that category still, 91% of transgender individuals, so these are people who do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, report experiencing homelessness, job loss, and harassment due to their being transgender. Now, there are certain things, phrases, we're going to call them microaggressions, that people say that can feel and be very traumatic for people within this community that aren't often labeled as trauma. And so people tend to brush them off. But I want to reiterate the importance. The first one is being misgendered or dead named. This is when somebody has told you their name, but you may have known them by a different name previously, and you continue to use the name that you may have known them by previously. It is very disrespectful, and it can also place the person in danger because it outs them. It says to the community or the room that you're in that this person is not who they say they are, or supposedly not who they say they are, and it can put them in a harmful situation. The second is being told that their lifestyle is sinful. This perpetuates the idea that someone is wrong for who they love and can significantly impair their ability to build a positive self-image, and it also can harm their ability to build a positive relationship with you as the service provider. And the third is being kicked out of their homes for being LGBTQIA. The loss of housing supports, as we discussed earlier, is in and of itself traumatic. But when you are losing your housing for trying to show up as your most authentic self, it's doubly traumatic. And it can cause higher rates of depression and suicide. So, you know, I know a lot of us on this call may be working with youth. A lot of us may be working with LGBTQIA youth. Currently, they are some of the highest number of individuals of populations experiencing homelessness, because the pandemic has been rough on a lot of families and on a lot of queer youth who have come out, have experienced housing instability. And it's a very real thing, and it's very traumatic. So just make sure that when somebody comes to you, you are providing a space to recognize that that is something they are experiencing. Next slide, please. With that being said, remember that silence reinforces harassing behaviors and attitudes for homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia. So I want to go back to that fear, learning, and growth mentality again. So I'm going to share a story with you guys really quickly. When I was a case manager in Washington, D.C., we had a client who was a transgender woman. And like myself and others, this was many people's first exposure to the transgender lifestyle. And she expressed to us on multiple occasions that she felt uncomfortable coming to our office because she thought that she was being mocked by the security that we had in the office. And we tried to problem solve. We did a lot, or we thought we were doing a lot to, you know, we would meet her in the community instead. We would try to understand. But what we didn't understand is we didn't validate her experience as a trans woman, as somebody who had an experience that was negative because of who she was. She was being harassed because she was being her most authentic self. And it caused her to disengage from services. So our fear approach in that situation said, I don't support this. I believe this person is choosing the struggle. If this person had just been less flamboyant, if she had just done this, then maybe she wouldn't have been harassed. Maybe she wouldn't have been such an easy target. Learning says, well, this is new to me and I don't understand it, but I see this person as a person. So that's saying, you know, I don't really get this. I don't know how to best support them, but I understand that they need services, and I understand that I want to help them and support them the best way that I can. And then the growth says, this person deserves to feel safe and welcome. So what does that look like? Does that look like me going to my supervisor and saying, hey, we need to do more for this person. They really don't feel safe within our agency, within our services. What can we do? Does that look like having a discussion with, you know, people that are higher up and or the security guard and saying, hey, what are some things that we can do to make this person feel safer when they come in? Or if we're meeting them in the community, what are some things we can do to make this person feel more valued for who they are? So, click, please. When you're carrying out these conversations and having these interactions with individuals within the LGBTQIA community, think about what are some ways that you can make sure your agency isn't perpetuating homophobia. What are some things that you can do? Sorry, you're fine. We can move along. Now, I was just going to say, what are some things that you can do to kind of shut those conversations down? If your coworker makes an offhanded joke, can you talk to them in private? Can you say, hey, I didn't like that, or that, you know, could be harmful for some of the folks we serve? Is it putting your pronouns in your email signature? Just little ways that you can combat homophobia in your workplace. And the last bias that we'll get into today is the bias around substance use. So substance use disorders occur when the recurrent use of alcohol and or drugs cause significant impairment, including health problems, disability, and failure to meet major responsibilities at work, school, or home. 90% of individuals in a behavioral healthcare setting have experienced trauma. For many, this trauma is often chronic and can occur over several years. Trauma and substance use occur echoing disorders. Therefore, you must treat both of them for one of them to have a chance of long-term recovery. Populations, so like a lot of the individuals we serve, who have historically had improper access to healthcare may use drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. Experts believe this is why many people experiencing homelessness may also use substances. So what I'm saying there is, let's say an individual has a toothache. They can't afford to go to a dentist. They may not have insurance. They probably don't have insurance. And getting into a low income or low cost clinic is going to take several weeks, sometimes several months to get an appointment. So this individual has found that it's a lot easier and a lot quicker to self-medicate with gin or with any kind of alcohol or with any kind of drug because, you know, in many places, it's a lot easier to get that substance than it is to get proper medical care. In many cases, substances are easier to obtain than medication and treatment. So that means they're more readily available when people want to treat a variety of pain. And I'm talking mental, emotional, and physical pain are all treated by substances when proper health care and proper medication aren't available. So what we see here is we see a lot of addictions being formed because of the psychiatric, the mood disorders, the anxiety disorders that are causing these things, or causing individuals to want to heal these things or to cope with these things. And then there's the trauma, there's abuse, neglect, PTSD, grief issues. So they're trying to cope, they're trying to self-medicate. So this is how we get to addiction from trauma, is trying to cope and trying to medicate all of those pains that you don't have readily accessible healthcare to deal with. So now that we understand a little bit more of how different traumas are presented and how different individuals may experience trauma, and how it plays out in their lives and their ability to adapt and engage with services, we can start putting holds in place to make sure that we are supporting them in the best way possible and acknowledging the trauma that they've experienced. The first thing that we can do is we can establish safety. And this means that the physical setting is safe. So when our offices open back up, when we're meeting people in person again, what is there around them? You know, if we have a lot of queer youth, do we have a pride flag somewhere? Is everybody safe space certified and that's shown in our office and that shows that they're safe there? You know, do we have posters that are health centered and wellness focused? We also want to make sure that we're building trustworthiness. We want to be honest, understanding, and direct. So we understand that building rapport means having honest and direct conversations even when they're uncomfortable. So that's that person coming to you and saying, hey, I experienced racism in this instance. And us saying, wow, I'm very sorry that you did that. How can I support you? That may be uncomfortable, but it's a conversation that we need to have. And it shows them that they can trust us. We also want to encourage peer support. Peer support offers a level of acceptance, understanding, and validation that can't be found in many other professional relationships. So somebody who has been in that situation is going to be a better guide and a better, you know, they can speak more from a more real perspective than somebody who has never been in that situation. We also want to utilize collaboration. Clients are going to gain a lot more from their experience if they're part of the decision-making process. So it's so easy, especially when somebody is transitioning from maybe emergency shelter to transitional housing, to say like, oh, okay, I have the perfect space for them. I know exactly what they're going to need, and just put them, you know, give them the first house that becomes available. But, you know, maybe it's in a neighborhood that they're uncomfortable with. Maybe they have bad associations with that area, you know? So how can we support that person and make sure they're a part of that decision process? That's going to lead us to facilitating empowerment. So individual strengths are recognized and built on and validated. So yeah, this individual may have difficulty holding down a job, but they are a really good interviewer and they are really good at getting new jobs. So what skills can we help them keep and what skills can we help them build on to make sure that we are focusing on their strengths and empowering them to push further? We also want to acknowledge culture. So we want to move past cultural stereotypes and those implicit biases. So, you know, if we do have biases based on race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or age or even geography, we don't allow those to show up in our services, and we're meeting everybody with the same level of respect and compassion. And then some tips to remember. Everyone has experienced their own struggles and trauma. Everyone. You don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. Sometimes people just want an ear to listen to their struggles. Create an awareness of struggles beyond those you may face in your own life. So that's going back, like I said, for me, I'm a young white man. I need to recognize that there are individuals who have a whole plethora of struggles that I don't even have to consider in my day-to-day life. You need to acknowledge barriers and provide building blocks to overcome them. So maybe this person has a history of evictions. That's a barrier to housing. What are we going to do to help them overcome them so that we can facilitate that empowerment? We also want to tailor our approaches to the way the individuals are most responsive. So like I was saying earlier, that client who didn't like coming into the office because she felt harassed, what are we doing to make sure that that client is receiving the best care possible while acknowledging this individual approach? And we also want to meet each person where they are and not where we want them to be. It's so easy for us to impose our own goals and our own wants and hopes for the individuals that we serve. But where are they? What are they realistically looking to get? And how can we best support them in what they are looking for? And then the last thing is always facilitate empowerment and empower yourself. You know, empower yourself to go above where you are and be that more empathetic and more compassionate care provider. But also empower the people you work with, because everybody has strengths, and everybody deserves to feel welcome and feel heard. And that's really what this training is all about. Just making sure that we're checking ourselves, we're leaving our biases out the door, and we're recognizing that people have some hard stuff to deal with sometimes. And it's up to us to listen and empower those folks forward.
All right, so we're going to get into our closing reflection. And so before we start this video, I want you to think about, have you ever walked into a space where you just felt like you didn't belong? You felt like you weren't welcome. And like, as you visualize that time that you walked into a space and you didn't feel welcomed, think of what are the external factors? What do you remember externally that may have contributed to that feeling of not belonging in that space or not feeling welcome? Think about the internal factors that you felt, if any, that again contributed to you feeling like you weren't welcome. So I want you to keep that feeling and that thought in your mind as we watch this video.
The freedom movement of the 1950s and 60s insisted that the United States live up to its Constitution and allow equal access for all. Finally, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, outlawing discrimination in public spaces. But changing the law doesn't always change reality. And being allowed in doesn't always mean being welcomed.
To be welcomed as a customer means that not only do I allow you in, but it means that I'm glad you're here. I want to serve you. I want your business. And I don't draw distinctions between you and other customers in terms of your value. But it's time we talk about what it means to not be welcomed as an American citizen.
It's not like I can mute my actual physical blackness, right? So I just assume that people see a particular thing when they see the color of my skin. So everything else has to be like perfect and clean and as blended in as really just an arsenal of different masks, you know? And it happens every time I leave my house.
When I leave my house, regardless of where I'm going, I'm just leaving my house. Just walking out the door. I'm not walking out the door thinking, what kind of hurdle am I going to run into today? What kind of way am I going to be judged? I walk out a free man. I just do my thing.
I have to make sure that I have given enough space between myself and another patron or another commuter on the train, just ensure that I'm not making someone uncomfortable. I have to make sure that my hands are visible when I walk into certain places so they make sure I'm not stealing. I try to make sure I make eye contact with people who may or may not be security or managerial staff, just to ensure that, I'm not here to hide anything. I watch my tone to make sure that I don't come off as threatening. Just leaving the house some days, sometimes it just keep you at home and just keep you away from everything.
For more than 50 years, equal treatment has been the law. Yet, as we know from cell phone videos, the nightly news, and maybe our own experience, we still have a long way to go.
Why are you following?
Watch this.
You think I'm stealing? You've been following me around the store the whole time. There she goes, she thinks I'm stealing.
Your card is fake. You're going to jail. That's what I kept hearing.
Unless you're spending money, we don't need.
Oh, I'm not spending money? Am I, because I'm black?
You've been warned. Your manager does not like black people, honey. Yeah. Oh my God. No, this is wrong. Oh my God. Yeah.
We just need to recognize that Black people are navigating the public space differently than white people, that women are navigating the public space differently than men, and not use the shortcut that has been wired into your brain because of the society that we live in, that tells you when you see me, you should be nervous or you should be worried.
It brought me
being allowed in doesn't always mean being welcomed. And so after watching that video, when clients encounter you or your colleagues, is the messaging, I'm glad you're here? Is it, do you communicate, I want to serve you? Do we check our biases as gatekeepers of information? We are gatekeepers of information. And it's important that we check our bias to ensure that we're not drawing distinctions between who we serve and how we serve. Understanding that our lens through which we view the world is just that, our lens. Acknowledging that our clients are navigating public spaces differently than we are, by recognizing that we can choose to show empathy, be aware of our biases, and making sure that we're giving grace. So in our reflection, go ahead, Liam.
So in our reflection today, we want to know, what did you learn? Were you surprised by anything? How do you think your bias could be impacting the work you do and the populations you serve? In what ways could you confront and overcome your bias? And then we also have a self-assessment tool. It is a bias, like implicit bias identifier. When you have time, please check it out. You will most likely be surprised by the answer, but it's a really great tool. Also, with that being said, remember this is a growth zone, so please ask your questions, please have your discussions. We're really open to hearing everything that you would like us to know. And here's our information. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll throw it back up there. But I just wanted to close out the stop presenting so that we can open the space up for some of those reflection questions, and just if anyone wants to share their experience or just has questions for us. All right, so going back to that first reflection question, what did you learn? Were you surprised? What do you think your bias, how do you think your bias could be impacting your work and the populations that you serve? In what ways do you feel you're able to confront or overcome your bias? And yeah, just share out. I see there are some hands raised, and so my team members will kind of help us to open the floor so that folks can talk. And then please remember to mute yourself.
Hi, Rashonda and Liam. Great presentation. Great meeting. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I just was so thankful to hear the word empathy, and that I felt like my parents did a good job in showing that to me when I had my troubles and challenges. So I feel fortunate to be able to share that empathy or give that empathy to all. And I'm glad that one guy that had said the thing about, worried about being judged. And I try to think about that word, because I just feel like that's something, if you just don't judge, then you don't have any bias towards anyone. So we're supposed to love everybody. And I think if you just get all that wrapped around you, you can do it. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Dan. All right. I see a hand raised, and there is a hand raise feature. So definitely please click on that if you'd like to say something. And if you're on the phone and we can't see your hand raised, just let us know. But I see there's William right here. Go ahead, Mr. William. Oh, I think you're on mute. Are you able to unmute? All right. Well, colleagues, help me see if there's another hand raised while William works on that. All right. I see PVH. Go ahead, PVH. You're on mute, Darlene.
Hi. So this is the second time that I participated in this session, and I believe it's very valuable. What I appreciate a lot about it is that it brings in evidence and science so that people can see we're not just saying things off the top of our heads, but there is evidence and science that proves that these things are happening and that the approaches work. So that's the one part that I truly value in it.
Thank you, Darlene. All right, William, coming back. Still nothing. Okay, there's an opportunity to call in as well. At the bottom of your screen, there may be it says HSNH Learning Collaborative. If you click on that link, there's an opportunity to call in, because we definitely want to hear your comment. All right, anyone else?
This is Andrea. I saw in the some questions in the chat, and one of the questions was, how are you addressing coworkers, family, and friends' open, visible bias against others without breaking relationships with them? And I wanted to speak to it, and then let you guys speak to the DHCD team. And one of the things that I think is so important, and we actually had an amazing discussion about this yesterday with our team, because we have the best team that could possibly exist, is that you are authentic, right? And when you're authentic, then you can bring the, I feel like you have a greater chance of bringing empathy to those conversations, because you are saying, here I am, right? This is me. Bring who you are to this conversation. And even if it doesn't, and again, that this is safe for us to have a conversation, right? That, that if you are addressing those things, they're not addressed in a calling you out type of way. It's like, let's have a conversation about this because I want to share a different perspective, or you know, like make it a learning and growing place, as opposed to you are saying things that are wrong, right? Nobody's gonna like, nobody, that's gonna just cause everybody to be defensive, right? It's truly about the same way that you're gonna talk to clients about issues that they're having and saying like, these are experiences that you've had in your life that have led you to have the beliefs and biases that you do. You can't judge those for somebody who you think should know better, right? Like that's the same thing that happens with their clients. We think you should make different choices. Well, we don't agree with that. But when you come from empathy and authenticity, then you're open to hearing that person. And if you can listen to somebody else, they may be then willing to listen to you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Okay, now I'm on the phone.
That's
This is
William? All right.
Yes, it is. Okay, first of all, I want to say that I enjoyed this presentation, and I hope to be able to get in on some more with you guys. But and the second thing is that book, The Color of Law, I think it's a good thing to recommend to people by Richard Rothstein to understand where the ghetto and everything came from, and that it was institutional. The other thing, and the last thing, is that some of us in our agencies deal with elderly people as well. And we do have, and there are biases against elderly people. For some reason, people don't think they're going to get old. So that's something that I would love to see how we handle as well, those biases against the elderly and senior citizens. But overall, I enjoyed the presentation, and you guys did a great job. I'm a little aged and experienced through the parts where we talked about the racism and everything, because I was definitely a part of all of that and experienced a great deal of it coming from that age of segregation and when I was coming up. So people need to understand how we feel. As you said, those internal feelings, when even now at the age I am, entering a building, being allowed there, but not feeling welcome. So that all of that still is going on, and people need to understand it's just more subtle. But through the last 4 or 5 years, we're seeing a lot more of it coming back.
Thank you, William, and I appreciate you sharing about your experience. And also thank you for the feedback about including our elderly. And I just want to say that DHCD, along with our own unit, HSNH, we have some tax credits available that help to allow people to age in place. And so I definitely advise, everyone, if you haven't already, to check out, the DHCD website. But we do have some grants available and opportunities to help, people age in place. And that is important to us. But thank you for that feedback and for sharing.
Hey, Rashonda, I saw another question come up in the chat, and it's specifically for Liam. It says, Mr. Hudson, is there any literature or statistics available on how homelessness affects your physical health? We've noticed our clients that enter our senior apartments as homeless clients typically pass from physical issues around a year after obtaining PSH. A year is not accurate average. That's just off the top of my head.
I know there are some clinical research journals about homelessness and physical health in LA specifically. I can probably find you some more statistics if you would like. Let's see. If you want to send me an email, that would be super helpful. and I can email those statistics back to you in the journals that I mentioned. And this goes for anybody, if anybody would like this information. Yep, and my email is coming up there, and it's L Hudson. I'll put it in the chat too. L Hudson at tricountypa.org.
Thanks, Liam. And yes, just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded, and the slides will be available. Any other comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I've been in the field a very long time, and I'm well aware of my implicit bias. I'm well aware, I know that I have work to do. But when I walk into a room as working with a client, like my body goes with me, and at the end of the day, I'm a white woman, and so I get that my clients feel like there's a level of comfort that is there with my African American colleagues that's not there with me, and I would like some ideas how to overcome that.
Can I say something? This is Pam Littlehill. It's refreshing just to hear you admit that. You know what I mean? I'm just sitting back listening to a conversation, and I appreciate your honesty. But now I'll let you go ahead and respond to her.
I walked into a home visit once, and a little girl started crying because the only white people in her life had been to like snatch her away from her parents. So yeah.
Thank you, Logan, for sharing that. And again, this is an open discussion. And so, we welcome, how others have, navigated spaces. Kendall, I'm going to pick on you as a white woman in homeless services, who, I look up to you and I just think you're brilliant. But even if you can, maybe speak to your experiences and how you navigate that, Liam, it's an open discussion. We're not the experts here. We just, want to create that space to have this dialogue.
I'll unmute Rashonda. So, and you bragged way too much on me because I don't have an answer. The only answer I could give is that you recognize your whiteness and the fact that there's always going to be that inability to, that inability to really take on the experience of your Black clients. I experienced that in supporting a diverse team, is that I will never be able to fully experience everything that you, Rashonda, have experienced. And clients coming with, from the Black community, I'll never be able to really put myself beside, I can put myself beside them, I cannot put myself in their shoes. And so I think as a caseworker, you need to recognize that and recognize your strengths in being able to assist them, and recognize that you're not going to walk in and get that buy-in immediately either. And that's okay. That's our work as case managers, is that we're trained to be able to see our own strengths and how we can help individuals, and hopefully get some buy-in and get some partnership, built over time. But yeah, Logan, I've had that thought. I've never been strong enough to say it, but I've certainly had that thought my entire career.
Thanks, Kendall.
Rashonda, is it okay if I respond to that? This is Ara.
Absolutely, please.
So, Logan, I also want to echo what everyone has said, like the fact that you're...
Can you share your title?
Sure. I'm the Balance of
Yes.
State COC program coordinator. I'm also a licensed social worker. That's my trade. But yeah, I just want to echo what everyone has said, that, you know, it's so important for you to recognize that and bring that to the forefront of your work, right? That you recognize that this is an uncomfortable situation for your clients, and how can you make this a comfortable situation for your clients? You're going into this work with them, not assuming, again, what they might need from this interaction. So let them lead you to what will be comfortable for them. Does that make sense? And let them lead you into the conversation that will be uncomfortable for you, but for them to be able to say, you know, when you come in for a home visit, this is how, you know, what might be the most helpful for, like, my daughter to feel the most comfortable around you, or for, you know, children that are in the home, or even my partner to feel comfortable around you, so that they recognize you are here to assist them and stabilize them in permanent housing, versus trying to impose your own bias of goals that need to be completed, and, you know, check boxes, things like that. You want to let the client lead you through this interaction. Is that helpful in any way? Because I've definitely sat in spaces where it was challenging, especially when they knew that, like, oh, the social worker is coming, and that comes with their own biases around social work, right? Similar to some of the experiences that you've had, not exactly the same. But yeah, I just wanted to share that, because that's something I've definitely experienced when I've entered clients' homes, shelter spaces, when I've engaged clients on the street. Everything has always been client-led. If they don't want to speak with me right now, then I take that also as a sign of, this is not the appropriate time to approach this conversation. Maybe I'll catch you later and say hi to you again. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
The other thing, this is Andrea again.
Yes, Andrea, and please share your title.
I'm the Homeless Data Integration Coordinator, but I have been in the homeless services field since probably 2006, I guess. And when I started, I was a case manager, and I did direct service as a white woman, and as a very young white woman, working with a predominantly Black female caseload, and many of them moms. And so at that point in my life, there wasn't a whole lot I had in common. I also come from Southwest Virginia, and I was working in Richmond, which is a very different dynamic. And I had an amazing supervisor who she was a Black woman, but one of the things she would do is introduce me to clients, and a lot of times go with me on the first home visit, right? And so it was kind of the way I saw it, and, you know, this is, you know, not having the right words for this, but kind of saying to that client, she's okay, right? She is going to be here to work with you. And she would talk about what that relationship would look like. And so at the beginnings, we would just have like these conversations about, like, you know, what do you want to share about yourself? You know, and sometimes when people share things about themselves, like, my experience wasn't the same, but the feeling was the same, right? So you got back to empathy. I've felt like that before. And all through my life, I have had struggles in my life too. So I can deeply empathize with a lot of characteristics that we see in the homeless population. But to me, it always goes back to that. If somebody can share a feeling, and I have experienced that feeling in some way, that's a way of connecting, and that's a way of being empathetic to you. Can be like, I mean, it could be a good experience, right? Like, they weren't all like these horrible tragic, traumatic experiences, but like something that you hear that says, yes, I've been there. And when you can do that, then you start building trust from there, where you find something in common. I'll stop now.
Thanks, Andrea. Any more comments? So it's a 2:19. So we have about 10 more minutes. And again, this presentation and the slides will be available afterwards. Any last minute thoughts or reflections? Something that this brought up?
This is Pam Littlehill.
Hey, Pam.
Hi. I remember many moons ago. Turn on my camera. I remember many moons ago trying as a caseworker in the field, going out and doing home visits and working with families in the projects of New York. And even as a caseworker and an African American, it wasn't just me doing field visits and establishing that rapport with individuals that were African American, but they were also white as well, and any other kind of nationality, just to put it broadly. And some of the same things we still had to deal with. How do I form this relationship? And part of it was really understanding or making an effort to understand cultural differences, cultural biases, look at where you are, acknowledge those. So that's the same thing I even still had to do as a caseworker back in the day. So those things didn't change. When I am this young African American woman and I'm having to go into a household with a white family that was well-to-do, and here I am, this young African American caseworker coming into this house with, again, no one that looks like me. So I'm anticipating their biases against me, as well as trying to be cognizant of my biases against them. And then seeing how are we going to make this work. And the trust comes from the honesty, establishing that relationship. It comes from the honesty. It comes from those uncomfortable situations, conversations. It doesn't come with made up information. Just to try to identify with you, because I'm gonna be honest with you, sometimes me as an African American, that would get on my nerves. I don't need people to try to all identify with me in that way, if you know what I mean. Don't change your dialect when you're speaking to me. If that's not how you speak all the time, you don't need to speak a certain way, walk a certain way to develop a relationship with me as an African American. It actually puts my guards up, because now, if anything, I don't trust you from you doing that. But those same experiences can come either way. So I was one of those ones that actually took out a white coworker with me into the projects. And I remember one of the first things she did when we were going into the house, it was her prejudging that it was a mixed marriage in the apartment that we went to, and see, this is why they have issues, because they intermarried. And she's in the field with me. It was looking at something as simple and going to certain households and understanding the respect with taking off your shoes versus not taking off your shoes when you enter my household. Some simple things even like that when we went into other cultures. And I really had to sit down and have a conversation with her in terms of those things. And some signs, something as simple as taking off your shoes or not taking off your shoes can be disrespect. I might be one of those ones. You come in my house and you take off your shoes. Well, you too familiar. I don't know you. Put your shoes back on. You see, where somebody else might say, oh no, take off your shoes when you come to my house. It's a sign of respect. You care about my environment. Don't bring bad energy into my house by wearing your shoes. So you have to know, like with anything, you have to know the culture that you're dealing with. You have to make a conscious effort to learn and understand customs, even some religious ways and things. It doesn't fully prepare you. Only a conversation with that client will. An honest conversation, but at least it meant that you made a conscious effort to look something up, understand something. Okay, this is this ethnicity. This is what might be their values, and ask them what's important to you. I'm not going to assume what's important to you. I'm going to ask you. I don't know. And a lot of times that's the best way to break the ice and develop that trust, by asking those questions. I'm not going to assume things about you, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the time to respect you and ask, how do you feel about this? Or in your culture, how do you do this? And explain, because I'm trying to get an understanding, and this is me and how I work. It's just having a conversation and leaving the assumptions behind, because that's usually what gets people in trouble. It's the all assuming. That's where we get stuck. So I would say communication is the key. Communication is the key. Understanding is the key. Just being aware of your own cultural biases before you enter somebody's threshold of that conversation, or they come into your office, that's half the battle right there. I'm gonna leave it there.
Thank you, Pam. Appreciate that. And I think what you also hit on were those growth goals that we talked about. So moving from fear zone to learning zone to growth zone. And that fear is, this didn't happen, that doesn't exist, or you telling me to take my shoes off, like creating that's a problem, when it's okay. Learning zone is, you would like me to take my shoes off. That's not typically something that I do, but to come into your home, I would be willing to do that. It's respecting that person's space. But yeah, I think you touched on that, asking questions. And then again, it's not when you are feeling uncomfortable, and that first point is you want to deny the experience, or what that other person experienced. Like Liam was saying, if a client comes in and they're like, that agency over there, they discriminated against me. Well, you might know someone at that agency over there, and that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And it also doesn't mean that it did happen. But that fear goes into, oh no, I know Kendall. Kendall would never have, discriminated. I know Kendall, that's that fear zone. Like you said, that learning zone is, I'm sorry you had that experience at that agency. Would you like to talk more about it? Or is there something that, how can I support you? And then growth is, again, I'm sorry that you had that experience. How can I support you through this? So thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. And then Kendall, I'm just picking on you because I love you. Any last minute comments? Also feedback?
Yeah, I've got just a little bit of feedback and reading off of the comments we've had in the inbox too. Liam and Rashonda, you all did such a fantastic job with this. Don't want to take many time in case anyone has any other questions I want for the team, but before we close off, I just want to make sure that I expressed my deep gratitude for you all tackling this topic and making it so much more approachable for everybody.
Thanks, Kendall. Yeah, definitely don't want to miss anyone that was on the phone or who had a question. And then I'll also just throw our information up here again for anyone that wasn't able to see it. And again, we will send out the presentation and the slides as well. Liam, you have anything before we close out? It's 2:29.
I think there was a hand raised. SJ, maybe?
Is it SJ Reed? If you're still here, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I had a statement, and I guess it's just a matter of just throwing it out there, where I could never, imagine poverty in another country. Like poverty in India is unimaginable to an American. Poverty in any other third world country is unimaginable in America, because not that we don't have poverty, it's just not at the same, I don't want to say level, but we have resources, maybe not a lot or maybe not enough, but we do have resources to help people who are in need. When we talk to other people from other countries, I've ran across where someone will try to relate their experiences from other countries to this country, and you really can't. You just can't. I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody else's culture, but I can't imagine what it would be like in Calcutta. But over here, coming from New York City and now living in Virginia, it's like, okay, we're afforded certain things as citizens, but maybe not so in Calcutta, or maybe not so in Mexico or South America. Maybe not so. I didn't create that, but it is what it is. I accept that you had your challenges there, but what about the people's challenges here? Because they have more than in America, they have more than maybe what someone else had in their other countries, doesn't mean you can what do you call it? Lessen their experience because your experience doesn't equate. Am I making any sense? I'm sorry.
Yes. No, absolutely. You're hitting on that validating, affirming,
So,
someone's experience, not
I'm
negating
just,
it.
a lot has to do with not just black and white, but it has a lot to do with, accepting people where they are, how they are, acknowledging it, and then showing some kind of appreciation for them as a person and their experiences. And I guess that's all I really wanted to say. But, to me, that can be toxic when you can't share without putting yourself up or the other person down. Just, I see you. And I see you for who you are. And I appreciate the opportunity to work with you. And how can we do better at this? Because I know if there was other circumstances, we probably would never meet. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. And on that note, we want to be mindful of everyone's time. So again, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate having the opportunity to spend this time with you. Again, this presentation will be available along with the slides. There's our contact information for me and Liam. But yeah, we thank you for being here. And yeah, feel free to keep the conversations going, because we want to see this throughout your entire agency, that everyone is doing trauma-informed care, whether they're working directly with clients or not, and that we're all, reaching that level of understanding, that we're all more aware of how we show up and also how others show up and all that they are, carrying when they walk into our spaces, and just making sure also that, that when clients come in, that they feel, welcome, that our doors are open to you. We're here to serve you. We're happy to serve you. Again, it's a privilege to be able to walk along someone, in their darkest time, and for you to be that person that you would want to encounter if you were in your darkest hour. And so we want that across the board. And so thank you all again for taking part in this conversation. And with that, this presentation has concluded.
Yay.
Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.